friends of the ear and the page, draw near, as today we follow the way poetry shapes a life, while a bond with homeland gathers through the written word, since speech arrives as a cradle gift from our elders and settles in us as breath does. Yet writing asks for pledged labour, for sore fingers and furrowed brows, and a patience that grows muscle in the mind. At the school desk where knuckles whitened around a pencil and copybook smelled of graphite and glue, we learned to raise letters like footholds on a ridge, so that each stroke lifted us higher, a climb in the Karakoram that began in childhood and advanced through blisters, ink stains, and stubborn will. Then reading followed as tide follows moon, granting reach and range, and shaping us as a potter shapes a vessel from a yielding lump. From that earned alphabet, a self takes form, and from that self, a circle of belonging extends, since poets and storytellers lend us the language by which a place grows intimate, and through their measure we inherit the courage to name our own. Ireland, through long seasons of rule by a foreign power, carried its mind across hard years on the backs of lines and stanzas, pages passed hand to hand in kitchens and classrooms, cadences marched through memory and steadied communities, and a people learned endurance through songs that housed grief and through essays that trained judgment. In this episode, we step into that living current, and we listen for the way a poem fastens a person to a country, a family to a parish, and a nation to its conscience, while the written word, won through toil, keeps the flame bright for all who gather round it. That being said, please listen to this special episode titled Dreamers of Éire, Reading a Nation into the Breath. Libraries carry an otherworldly charge within their walls, the way summer hum carries in a hedgerow at noon, since breath altars on the far side of a threshold and footsteps relearn their measure as if a hidden metronome set the pace, while the door eases inward on well-oiled hinges and the draught keens along corridors as a guide spirit. The reader passes into a realm that's scents of paper, linen glue, and a trace of long-dried rain upon overcoats, and time shifts its gait so that minutes lengthen like shadows over a field at evening. The shelves stand as vessels in a harbour, each hull packed with provisions for distant weather, and the aisles open into channels where voices from many centuries call with rangy confidence, so that the pulse steadies and the shoulders drop, and a small delight climbs the spine like a bird that has found a perch. The National Library of Ireland receives that pilgrim step as a chapel receives the faithful, since stone, glass, and quiet align with the spirit's appetite for scope, and the dome gathers daylight into a pale basin while the reading lamps warm a local dusk. The hush quivers, though pages turn and pencils move, and a librarian's hand conveys volumes the way a gardener settles a seedling into prepared soil, with a palm that measures weight and a wrist that knows how to spare roots from bruise, while granting them a place to thrive. Under that dome, the afternoon opens like a concertina as a slim brown book finds the felt of a green desk, and gilt letters flare anew as if the binder had just lifted the hot stamp. Arthur O'Shaughnessy, a London clerk with an Irish ear, whose employment among jars and specimen drawers under the British Museum's roof trained a scholar's patience into his hand and laid a dry domestic music under his verses, since he walked Britain's capital with a memory of Ireland cadence pricking his heel like the thorn that insists on attention. His poem entered the world with a pledge to the class of makers, and gave them a motto that schoolchildren recite as a charm: we are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams. Linen pages lift as wings lift, dust carries a faint spice, an adjacent reader mouths the words and smiles with that involuntary assent that Dubliners share upon hearing a phrase that feels both ancient and newly fitted, and a porter on break checks his watch, and listens from a respectful distance with the air of who knows that a good line steadies a shift. O'Shaughnessy's decades appear across the desk in small tokens, a museum pass folded into a wallet, a journey up Gower Street under a haze of lamplight, a dinner in the modest flat where conversation runs on poetry and on wages, a night at the desk where the ode takes shape and where the hand lifts from the paper with the tremor of someone who realizes that a sentence has carried farther than he planned. He had entered print with an epic of women and with translations from French ballads, and he anchored his pledge to the imagination in Music and Moonlight in 1874, while a city of gas mantles and fog accepted his ardour. The biography records a career that blended zoological diligence and lyric appetite, and the record keeps also the price of such a double labour, though the page prefers to keep the desk in view and the poem bright in its place in the shop window. A student at the far table, in a navy jumper with white collar peaking, straightens with a start when he arrives at that line, since the vowels settle in his throat as naturally as a fiddle settles in a crook of elbow, and he copies the opening into a notebook with a soft pencil that whispers as it travels. His mouth shapes the words in silence, and the wet wheels on Kildare Street sing a faint chorus through a window vent as if the city joined in. The ode serves here less as foundation and more as lamp, since the century ahead of O'Shaughnessy requires fire for paths barely sketched, and the poem lifts a glow that finds hearths across the Irish Sea and carries across decades toward the island's rooms. While he sings of dreamers with a Victorian music in the ear, he also equips classrooms in Kerry and Sligo with a statement of makerly pride that young readers accept as permission to announce themselves with a cheerful audacity. The line enters kitchens with steam rising from kettles, barrooms with a stout dark perfume, and assembly halls with varnish on the floor. It trains the ear to hear lyric speech as a civic utterance, and it supplies a low flame for long evenings of anxious weather. The librarian passes again, linen gloves smoothed to the wrist, and the book closes with the weightless finality of air closing over a bird's passage. And the next volume arrives with a heavier military of purpose, as if a standard had gone up above the desk. A brown cloth binding worn at the corners leans into the reader's hands, and the title delivers a scent of late summer at Cool, Michael Robarts and the Dancer. Yeats's century recruits the mystical and the municipal with a serene assurance, since the poet who traces planetary gyres in a vision also allocates budgets and casts actors with the briskness of a theatre manager. In the Abbey's rehearsal room the boards gleam with sweat under lamps, and the poet directs with that stately lift in the voice that rehearsal rooms accept once excellence follows. He instructs an actor to pace a line from Easter, 1916, as though coin had passed palm for a measure of grief, and the actor releases the syllables as one might lay a wreath. All changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. The stage holds a city's light and shadow at once. A tailor slips into the stalls after hours. A schoolteacher folds a newspaper inside a coat pocket like a hidden psalter. A fishmonger's apron smears its own heraldry across the lobby as the evening crowd flows in with a fidget of expectation. Yeats confers ceremony upon the civic, since he understands that a people accepts elevation when ritual earns it. He shapes cadence so that the sidewalk hears itself inside an iamb, and he leads the country toward a language that consoles with no slackening when the ledger of names grows long. The walk from Dublin Theatre to Galwater proceeds through a corridor of seasons. Cool Park receives him with gravel underfoot and winter bare branches against a wind that pushes a colder music through the teeth. The lake delays speech with its glassy composure, while swans mark a pale glyph upon the surface as if a spell required their script. A hawthorn whispers under a low sky. The poet keeps company with old gods and new memorabilia, and the house behind him offers a window glow where Lady Gregory's presence steadies hospitality with that ample confidence which a country house learns when it holds open days for a republic in training. The biographer records a younger Yeats walking London rooms with ardent awkwardness and a fierce resolve to construct a public life from private emblems, and the later Yeats converting those resources into civic service while keeping his chosen masks. When he fashions the Senate speech, when he quarrels from a dais, when he writes lines that a province quotes at gravesides and at pub counters, he demonstrates that lyric authority collaborates with democratic rituals so long as the poet pays in hours, arguments, and unglamorous chores. A bell in the library cups its sound while light thins. On the next desk a reader raises his head, mouth shaping Mo Crow, my heart, and the breath of the Irish language crosses the aisle with the warmth of a hearth recollection. Yeats measures art against appetite with a craftsman's honesty in the austere confession of the circus animal's desertion, where he concedes the origin of splendour in the workshop of the heart's rag and bone stock, while he accepts at the same time the dignity of art's ladders even as he sets them aside. Now that my ladder's gone, I must lie down where all the ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. The old man's rehearsal of humility reads as an audit rather than a renunciation. The voice that earlier raised a theatre and a ritual vocabulary now sits among tools at day's end in the same room where a younger man once designed masks, so that the circle closes with a grave, companionable grace. Ireland carries another music in the throat, more sod-coloured and eel-sleek, and the reader hears it when a book with a Faber blue spine lands with affectionate certainty on the green felt. Mossbourne rises from pages with the resin scent from fence posts and the sweet iron of a pump handle. A father's spade bites the earth and the handle's worn gloss records the palm's history. A boy watches stance, timing, and the peculiar compression of shoulder and hip that a steady digger learns with years. That boy holds a pen years later, and the old rhythm returns through a different instrument, as if family meteor moved through the blood into another craft. He sets the instrument between finger and thumb and names his purpose in a pledge that honours labour while transferring it to language. Between my finger and my thumb the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. The line arrives with the ground's integrity, and the stanza clicks like a spade against a stone, while a kettle drums softly, and the kitchen's plain furniture accepts its role as witness. Seamus Heaney enters the room with coat damp from an Antrim squall and cheeks bright with that farmer's weathered blush. He sorts poems on a table with the same patience as a man sorts seed potatoes, since the hand learns cadence from repetitive work, and the mind marries ever closer to its materials when the palm earns its calluses honestly. Heaney reads P.V. Glob's photographs of bog bodies with reverence for archaeology and with an ear already tuned to sacrificial music. He lifts those images into his own ritual reckoning and asks how a tribe adjudicates violence when it believes itself under the eye of divine appetite, and how a modern parish inherits such a ledger while refusing new injury. He draws a line from dead queen to contemporary casualty, never to justify any bloodletting, always to record correspondences that help a reader to map impulses that linger under newer uniforms and slogans. And the bog, with its silent patience and its preservative embrace, becomes a parliament where voices across centuries address one another through images, objects, and traces. In the mouth of a Belfast street where a sodium lamp halos damp concrete with a chemical dawn, Heaney's line holds. In a school assembly where chairs scrape and microphones squeal, his cadence seats itself. And at a community meeting where the need for courage rises like a tide under talk, his translation from Sophocles reaches across the room and turns the air with a sudden lift. So hope for a great sea change on the far side of revenge. The phrase does committee work, and it grants spine to those who venture compromise in hard times. A republic receives such a blessing with the practical gratitude that greets the arrival of workable weather. A second Heaney volume slides open at north, and the bogland spreads across the desk with its tea-brown sheen. The reader turns a page and pauses over the pursed lips and closed eyelids of a preserved face, as if a parish bell tolled from under peat. A teacher in an Antrim classroom retrieves a slim collection from her bag and places it on a desk with the gravity due to essential instruments. A scattering of teenagers bend toward the page with that guarded tilt familiar to educators in every county, and her voice lifts the line about the pen and the spade with an affection that feels older than she is. She sets the book down and addresses the room with a kind insistence born of experience. You can lift a word the way you lift a sod, and you can lay it true if your wrist keeps the old measure. A half-smile passes among the rows, as if a small warmth moved from desk to desk. The bell rings, and still the line lingers within chests that carry folders and headphones along the corridor. The study returns to O'Shaughnessy because the National Library, in its gracious habit of laying kin beside kin, understands how a flame passes from one taper to another. The ode gains foothold in Irish memory for reasons that exceed quotation. Since the poem dignifies a class of people, makers, players, dreamers, who often receive indulgence and suspicion in equal measure, it proposes that these workers shape public futures, and it does so with a confidence that carries a music hall's swagger and a cathedral nave's uplift. A clerk of Irish stock who tended bottles and drawers while riding a city whose empire hummed through papers and ports produced a mantra that an island across the water accepted with pleasure and mischief. The lines turn up on schoolroom walls and in speeches at arts councils. They license ambition in children who might apprentice to instrument, brush, script, or stage. They allow parish life to treat artistry as muscular labour rather than a froth of feeling. The poetry preceding the ode, balladry and classical shapes translated through a Victorian polish teaches him how a refrain works on a room. The epic of women offers an apprenticeship in ceremonial address, and so the signature line in Music and Moonlight arrives seasoned by the trade. A careful chronicle of his life lists dates and posts with Victorian neatness, while also noting an early death that closed a window too quickly. Yet the ode refuses diminishment, since the many voices it empowers continue the work by singing it with fresh breath in new rooms. You can hear a man who knew specimens and shelves, and still he sings as if a parish joined him. The porter says in a murmur near the desk, cap folded under his arm, eyebrows raised with a craftsman's appreciation. A fine pledge survives since it suits work, and he tunes a country beyond his own street, which counts as a gift in itself. The conservator replies, easing a linen wrapper across another volume with hands that remember silk and vellum and the small stretch of an old glue seam. A pledge like that travels under many coats. A counter-voice in the mind arranges its argument as the light shifts pewter across the dome, since the essaying spirit in the room welcomes challenge as a way of testing fibre. One cautious reader in memory raises an eyebrow over Yeats' hauteur and his appetite for emblem, wondering whether ceremony leans toward privilege and away from the scruffy democratic texture of tenements and tram depots. Another measured voice questions Heaney's pastoral anchorage and asks how fully estate stairwells and riot shield glare enter his melodic field. A third voice wonders whether O'Shaughnessy's London setting blurs the island's local idiom, even as his line stirs Irish classrooms to applause. The room grants audience to these rebuttals, since the Irish habit of debate respects contention as a companion to conviction. Answer arrives through scene, since scene bears pressure with a public honesty that rhetoric alone rarely provides. In the Abbey's workshop, an apprentice carpenter and an actress share a doorway as a flat slides into place, and as a cue reaches its moment, the poet with a senator's memory bends with a stagehand's humility to check a brace, so that the glue between classes holds through an hour's labour. A teacher from a Ringsend school stands at the back of the stalls with late shift fatigue in her bones, and a readiness in her shoulders to carry one more line home to her class. Yeats's sentence lands, and she nods with that slight Dublin tilt that ratifies with no fuss, since the cadence carries both uplift and ground. Across town in a tower block stairwell, the Heaney couplet about the pen fills a teenager's mouth as he waits for a lift with plastic bags cutting into fingers. The line grants dignity without sugar, and the boy steps into the lift with a small inward rise as well. Near a border road where hedges breathe and fields turn slate in rainlight, the Bog Queen's photograph meets a newsprint picture of a casualty on a kitchen table. Heaney's page threads the pictures while refusing any alibi for harm, so that grief receives a place to stand and judge. In Dublin's reading room again, O'Shaughnessy's pledge for makers reaches a coder who has slipped in during lunch with a baguette wrapped in paper, since the line addresses any worker who shapes reality from the invisible. He wipes crumbs from the page edge with the same care as a bandleader dusts his instrument. A voice from the Abbey's foyer adds one more layer as posters curl slightly in their frames and the floor gleams from a recent polish. You hear him give a city at ceremonies, and then you see him count chairs and tickets. A manager remarks to a colleague while checking a clipboard. The dignity grows from graft. The colleague nods while a rehearsal call bell clinks against the brass rail. A young actor in a sweater rushes through with a script half tucked under an arm. A carpenter passes carrying a brace, jaw set with focus. In such a house, Yeats's sentences acquire their durable sheen, since they serve tasks as much as ideals, and service grants them weight. The hour slides toward evening, and the dome's colour deepens toward smoky gold. A new name waits at the door of the side room off the Abbey bar, where framed posters of past productions line the wall, and a crowd carries a respectful murmur that smells of stout perfume and damp wool. Seán Hewitt stands easy on the small stage with a paperback open in one palm and the other hand loose at his side. His vowels hold a city's clarity while admitting garden scent and mythlight. He reads from Tongues of Fire, and the phrase rises as if the old feast still warmed parish lungs, tongues of fire, so that a student at the back places a pencil behind her ear and smiles into a private memory of a grandmother's backyard and a Pentecost hymn. The new line shoulders beside the old lines with grace. It carries a parish register of plants and paths, while inviting breath shaped by gospel. It offers a site where domestic tenderness and inherited right touch cheeks. He names a garden, I feel bramble snag my sock. The man in a worn coat tells his companion as they wait for their coats. He says fire, and the parish returns as heat in my own throat when I try to sing at Christmas. He lets the laurel and the laity share breath. The companion replies with a trace of mischief. He keeps sense and sacrament in the same sentence, and each thrives. What power inside such phrases convinces a citizen that they describe who I am? The answer hinges upon cadence, image, and task shared among neighbours. Yeats composes sentences that carry ritual authority while still allowing room for the creak of boards and the hiss of lamps, which means that the crowd accepts the words with good humour. Heaney binds the lyric to work so that dignity rises without rhetoric and hopes stands shoulder to shoulder with labour. O'Shaughnessy salutes the maker in the plainest of uniforms and thereby folds shop floors, rehearsal rooms and parish halls into a single guild. Hewitt's garden speech, steeped in the city's parish sprawl and the church's embered language, renews that movement for a generation that lives online and off with equal fluency. He offers a space where domestic patience and inherited right kiss with no awkwardness, and the kiss persuades a listener that Irishness proceeds as a living negotiation through words shaped for breath. The scholar winding through the stacks gathers historical evidence as lightly as a Martyr D lifts a chair, since proof strengthens warmth. O'Shaughnessy's publication record shows steady diligence, an epic of women in 1870 as an apprenticeship in elevated rhetoric and choral address, followed by Lays of France with its troubadour echoes, and by Music and Moonlight with the signature ode that would acquire 1,000 classrooms as its real theatre. The Dictionary of National Biography notes his museum post and his early death, and still the administrative record yields before the sight of a schoolchild's grin when a teacher chalks the line upon a board. Yeats' alt labour in a vision opens a window into the disciplined fantasy that fed the public poems, while Lady Gregory's memoir of theatre work grants proof of hours spent in carpentry and committee, which means that the glamorous sentences came yoked to practical labour from the start. The biographer's chronicle turns the key in the door between privacy and civic role with courtesy and exactness, showing how an awkward, dreamy young man formed a statesman's poise while keeping appetite for symbol. Heaney's essays in Finders Keepers reveal a critical intelligence that honours sources and neighbours with equal grace, while Open Ground offers the texture of the lines themselves in a shape that many readers carry for life. Glob's photographs anchor the bog poems in verifiable archaeology, which consequently seats the lyric flight in the heavy wet earth itself. Through these materials, the afternoon's argument secures its grip on reality while keeping space for shimmer, since facts in Ireland grow lively when placed among voices. By early evening, the library half empties, and the light falls like a shawl over shoulders. The porter lingers to chat at the desk with the conservator, while the student with the navy jumper gathers his books into a scuffed satchel. The talk bends toward that cheeky hypothetical that Irish rooms enjoy. What kind of Ireland might unfold in a world without these three voices? The porter runs a cloth over the desk edge with the same care as a man washes a favourite cup, and he answers with images in sequence. A Senate chamber retains its benches and its rules, yet speeches lack that attentive cadence that the Tower perfected, so that listening feels like duty without flavour. A primary school classroom hangs maps and saints' pictures just the same, yet a small boy misses the exact pride that digging confers upon the hand that writes. The civic festival lights fireworks and serves chips with vinegar, yet a younger singer proceeds shy of O'Shaughnessy's permission to claim public authority with a refrain. The conservator nods, since she spends her days among the proof of such hypotheses, and she replies with a last example that pleases them both. A bus queue over Nassau Street, where strangers share a line from Yeats or Heaney to break a weather silence, and where the shared smile counts as citizenship for an instant. The essay's counterpoint asks one final balance before departure, and scene once again carries the weight. An evening reading in West Belfast, with security doors creaking and folding chairs, set out by a caretaker with a soft word for every attendee, offers Heaney's voice to young ears that still ring with headlines. The older men and women in the room let the vowels steady them with an air of old friends arriving, while teenagers at the back tilt toward the words cautiously, and then lean in as if the vowels hinted at a safe house. A civic commemoration on O'Connell Street, with dignitaries sitting under a tent and a thin rain controlling umbrellas, offers Yeats's commemorative music as a formal ribbon upon a day steeped in grief and pride. The crowd listens with an Irish attention that mixes scepticism and affection, and then the applause arrives in a wave as if the nation had exhaled. A library classroom in Limerick, with a contemporary poet reading from a new book, offers proof of succession. The lines breathe with parish breeze and a metallic city tang, and the audience releases small accent sounds in just the places where an older generation once released them for Yeats and Heaney. As the hour strikes, the reader closes the last book with careful pressure so as to protect the spine, and the dome lets the evening through in a soft wash. The city resumes its bustle with extra light in it, since sentences carried into the street act like lamps tucked into coats. The National Library returns its treasures to the stacks, though a few words hover in the air like midges over a hedge in high summer. Then the pilgrim of that afternoon steps out past the guard and onto Kildare Street, where bus brakes sing, and a new windcut sneaks along the collar with playful insistence. The walk to the Abbey passes under Georgian windows lit yellow like toast, past a statue whose plinth knows pigeon feet and rain streaks, and into a foyer where the floor shines with recent polish. A small reading in the bar offers Hewitt again, and the poem about garden and ember, and the audience leaves with words in their pockets like coins that clink lightly with every step. The day resolves into a vow, since vows suit evenings and suit Ireland, which believes in promises that remain breathable like good coats. The country carries O'Shaughnessy's pledge for makers as a pocket badge that allows artists to stand in council chambers with their heads high. The country carries Yeats' ceremony as a tool that dignifies occasions while keeping the shoulders free. The country carries Heaney's grammar of field and parish as a comfort and as a spur to decency when tempers threaten to rise past wisdom. A listener who says under the breath, "It is who I'm," speaks from a recognition that the line in the mouth synchronizes with the heart's pump and the hand's work. Such alignment breeds loyalty and radiates cheer. A final object stands ready for the ritual close. A bell set on a sacristy table in a city church, brass dulled by fingertips and rope polished by palms. The sacristan gestures to a helper in Irish with the old formula, taber and clogged tugum, "Bring the bell to me," a mire, and the bell rises. The ring that follows fits the evening as if Dublin had waited for it, and the echo passes along the streets toward the river, the way a good line passes through a people's speech, which means that the city lodges in a sound the memory of a day spent among pages, and the future lifts its head with appetite to answer that sound.